Welcome around the world to the Social Network Show. This is Jim Nico, your co-host with the Rappaport brothers, John on my left and Brett on my right. And I'm going to turn the show over now to John on my left, unless they start bickering, and then Brett will interrupt. Okay, here we go. John?
Brothers are supposed to bicker. That's by definition, that's what brotherhood is all about. Thanks, Jim, and thanks for having us on the show today. So I'm John Rappaport. I'm the CEO of Serpal, and Serpal is a social networking company. It's a platform, and our focus is primarily in the political spectrum, but more importantly about personalizing and privatizing and making social networking more effective for niche markets. And so we're very excited today. We have a couple of guests. So the first, I want to introduce my brother, Brett Rappaport, who I'm in business with, and let Brett tell you a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in social networking and also in radio.
Well, sure. And Jim, thanks again for having us. It was great to be on with you last week, or 2 weeks ago, actually. And great to be here today in studio at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Also with our new friend here, Elliot Karp, who is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Las Vegas. It's a pleasure to have you in here.
Thank you.
Group of the tribe, so we call it. Serpal's a private social networking company, and basically what we're doing is we're creating new communities into different arenas where you can invite, potentially millions of people to entertain discussions, to enhance the impact that their groups have on not just their communities, but on their membership and outreach. And as we all know, social media is the next most important thing to growing business, to growing enterprise, and I'll lead into this, to growing nonprofit organizations such as the Jewish Federation. Now, Elliot, I have a piece of information here that I had researched, and that is the Pew Research Center found that 1 in 5 people today is not affiliated religiously, which is up from 15% just a few years ago. And so I lead into this question, and that is, how would you correlate that to how your organization is trying to grow with the younger generations that will hopefully sustain organizations such as the Jewish Federation in the future?
Well, it's an interesting way to kick off the conversation. Reflecting on affiliation rates, I think a large measure of that has to deal with the fact that many people are not necessarily affiliating with mainstream religious institutions, congregations, churches, synagogues, temples, and are looking for alternatives. And many of those alternatives don't necessarily convey the old model, or what was the historic model of membership and affiliation, where you belong to a particular church, a particular synagogue, a particular faith community, and there's many more alternatives, if you will. Certainly that's the case, I believe, within the Jewish community, that some would believe that we're in a post-denominational phase of American Jewish life, meaning, the traditional Reform, Conservative, Orthodox delineations are no longer the case, and there are many more chavarot, or friendship circles, that meet informally and therefore defy perhaps the definition by the Pew Charitable Trust. The other side of the Pew finding is whether or not Americans are affiliating with religious institutions. Are Americans increasing or decreasing their faith participation and their feeling of religiosity, if you will, or observance? And I think you'll find that hasn't necessarily changed. So it's the method, and I think that goes right to your question in terms of social networking. In other words, what are the ways that people are connecting together with one another? And maybe the new wave of religious observance, although I personally have some issues with that, is, can you be religious and have a faith community online using social networking, as opposed to coming together at a particular place, whatever your faith tradition may be, where you're together in the same space?
Well, very good question. Now, Elliot, you have over 30 years' experience working with the Jewish community in this arena, so I would certainly consider you to be very generous with your time and outreach, but also an expert in this area. So when I look at the use of social media for an organization such as yourself, I happen to know that a lot of temples now, maybe if you weren't able to make service on a particular week, you could see a sermon after the fact, or if perhaps you're overseas or traveling, you could log in and see things. The rabbi or the cantor or anyone else affiliated with the various synagogues could post different information. Here's a perfect example. If you have a community outreach thing, suppose you're meeting with some elderly organization to spend time with those individuals, you could send out a message to the group, all the information. You could actually post a link to a map and directions and all the information, which is certainly easier than having to do a mailing or have to make phone calls.
Yeah, look, the challenge, I think, for those of us in community service, or you started this conversation with religious and faith-based, is the challenge of tradition and change. How do you hold on to what are the traditional patterns while still evolving in a modern society and using the technology and the innovations? You're absolutely right. My own rabbi here in Las Vegas, congregation I belong to, in my job, I go around to many different synagogues. So on the high holidays, I happen to miss one of his key sermons, okay, or at least he thought it was one of his key sermons, and I happen to agree because, going to your point, he said to me, "I'm sorry you were at another synagogue to hear my Yom Kippur sermon, but you can catch it on the web." He had it videotaped, and he placed it up on the web. And a couple days later, I wasn't there in the congregation, but I had the ability to hear it, see it, a couple days later. And he's right. First of all, I did miss it live, but I still valued and benefited from being able to hear it a couple of days later. That's really terrific in terms of the ability to share information and connect people. The challenge is, how do you then connect to a community through the use of the internet and the web? Because there I was on my iPad, okay, sitting in my condo watching my rabbi deliver what I thought was a great sermon. I didn't have the benefit of my fellow congregants sitting to the right and to the left of me. Of course, in synagogue, that meant that we would have been talking to one another and not listening to the rabbi necessarily, okay? But nonetheless, it's a notion of how do you share online in a real time, in a personal way, not, because I understand the social networking value of connecting people and sharing through the keyboard, as it were, okay? But for me, it's also a matter of how do you touch people. There was a leader of the National Jewish Federation movement, Shoshana Cardin, from Baltimore, Maryland, who was at that point the president of what was the Council of Jewish Federations. And this goes back well over 20 years ago. This is long before smartphones and iPads, and we probably didn't even have high-speed fax machines at that point, okay? And she said to me and to a group of fellow professionals, we have to be high-tech, but we can't afford to lose the high touch. And I think that has always been my concern and what I'm struggling with in terms of this. Technology is great, but you can't lose the personal touch.
An excellent point. And I think the fact that if you use these tools to bring people together for events, and not just fun events too, I think if synagogues or any organization for that matter could create enjoyable events to bring the membership there, not always for work purposes or things that may not be as enjoyable, I think it helps, one, for everyone to come together and meet one another, build those relationships that you don't get because we sit there texting back and forth and always talking on the telephone and communicating via email. Another interesting thing, though, that I've discovered, and which is contrary to what we would think, is that older generations actually maybe spend more time at the computers doing and using these tools. And you'd never imagine this, but they can't go anywhere without their high-tech cell phones and their iPads.
My own kids are 27 and 24, and they accuse my wife of being a Facebook stalker, okay, because she's constantly on there. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this notion that somehow or another the technology has age barriers is really not true. And clearly, older Americans have time and the accessibility to it. You're also absolutely right that the technology has the ability of giving people many more points of contact. The challenge, once again, is how do you cut through all the clutter? Because everyone, what I'm finding is, look, our organization, the Jewish Federation of Las Vegas, we have Facebook pages. We have, we've been experimenting with tweeting, but it's not just our Facebook page, but every one of our constituent or affiliate groups, whether it's Young Leadership, our doctors group, our lawyers group, our women's philanthropy group. We have a program, PJ Library, which is a pajama library program for free. Everybody has a Facebook page. And so, you're constantly inundated with information, and it's duplicative also, because then people who friend you open up their own and say, well, you going, and then it's a pyramid, it's a tree, it branches out, and the next, so it's overwhelming. At least that's my sense. And the comment that we're getting is between all of the Facebook pages and the email blasts and the websites is you're inundating us with information, and therefore, how do we cut through the clutter? And one of the things we're struggling with is frequency. How often do you blast? How often do you send out messages, and things of that sort? Are we using it? Absolutely, we're using it.
Well, it's a bit of a struggle because this is still new terrain, right? As popular as social networking is, and virtually everybody now is engaged in at least one or more social networks. But as you point out, Elliot, we are inundated with information. Much of it is replicated. Much of what we push out is then turned back around and sent back to us. And how do we weed through it? How do we take this new art form, make it more efficient, more effective in our lives and our organizations without actually creating new unnecessary work for us?